Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Saṅghāṃ saranang gacchāmi. Titiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Titiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Titiyampi Saṅghāṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammāṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Saṅghāṃ saranang gacchāmi. So hello everybody, this is Bhante Joe here, and I'm just here at Sri Ñāṇarāma, which is a monastery in Colombo. And it's a bit of an oasis. It's in central Colombo, has a lot of trees here, and they've warmly welcomed me here. So I'm staying here for a period of time, and then planning to head down to Yala, the Yala area, to have a look at some monasteries, maybe some kutis down there. And so one of the themes that's been coming up often recently, this kind of reflecting often in meditation, is this theme of kind of delusion. And the Buddha says that that anger is basically quick to leave. You know, it arises, it's quick to leave, and is very harmful. And greed is it arises, it's slow to leave, but it's not that harmful. But delusion is both slow to leave, it's hard to get rid of, and is very harmful. And so delusion can come in many different forms. And the most basic form is that people see things that are unappealing as appealing. I mean, kind of things that cause them to suffer, they desire, they grab onto. And this is what keeps samsara going to a certain extent. People like things that also cause them to suffer. This is one aspect of delusion. It's what you might call the most basic aspect. It's because we perceive samsara, we perceive the world as worth pursuing, that one keeps coming back to pursue it. It's the most basic type of delusion. But there's many other types of delusions that can come into the mind, because one can tend to think of the mind not just as a single entity, but almost like a battlefield. In the Thai forest tradition, the great teachers, they often refer to the kilesas almost as if they're living things. And you can imagine these living things as almost as if they've occupied real estate in our minds. I was reading a sutta the other day where Mara comes to the Buddha and he says, you know, the eye is mine, and it basically goes through the 6 sense bases in their context. He says the mind is mine, and you know, I think also goes through the contacts and these things. And essentially, all of samsara belongs to Mara. And the tools that one uses within samsara also belong to Mara. They're under his domain. So the tricky thing about practicing meditation, or practicing in general, is that because we're in samsara, we have these tools. We have to use the tools that are part of samsara to undo samsara. And what this means is that some of the tools that we have, if we put them down, if we're not really careful with them, the kilesas can pick them up. So one doesn't have to think of the mind as if it's just a single unitary entity. One can envisage it more as like a battlefield. A battlefield has territory. A battlefield has various features to it, and two sides are competing for dominance of this territory. The one that wins throws the other one out, and then they can enjoy the resources. They can use the resources of that territory. So the things that we require in order to practice Dhamma well, to throw out delusion, they're perceptions. Right? They're sankharas. They're the various mental formations that we use to create perceptions, to create the images and sounds and ways that we think. These are all sankharas, and we require consciousness. There's kind of this aspect that just knows. You know, we require a form, actually. Sometimes we don't think so much of the practice of Buddhism as involving a body, but having a healthy body is very, very important. And also, to a certain extent, we use feelings. The Buddha teaches to use feelings. So the Buddha teaches us that we should practice to attain jhanas. And these are a type of feeling not of the flesh. So all of these things that we're using, these are like territory in the mind. These are places in the mind that you can build up, you can put your garrisons around, you can fortify them, and you can draw resources from them. But in order to do that, one has to throw out the enemy that's already occupying them. And the tricky thing is that enemies, they sometimes show up in ways that are very forceful and strong and scary, but sometimes they're also very covert. They can send spies into your territory. So you think that what you're doing is wisdom, or you think what you're doing is the correct perception or the correct path to go on, but actually it's been co-opted. So what this requires actually is a certain amount of knowledge of the Dhamma, knowledge of the Buddha's teachings and what he teaches. And then in addition to this knowledge, it requires a very careful observation. And when we think about what it would be like to find a friend who betrays us or a spy, the spies and friends who betray us, they act like they're friends. They act like they're on the same side of the battlefield that we are. And that's why they're able in secret to do these things that undermine our ability to fight. So perceptions are one of these things, and these things can come in many different ways. As we talked about, the most basic one that fosters delusion is that samsara is desirable. But many other times are projections about the future, about what we're going to do in the future or we need to do in the future. These types of things can also be twisted so that they're deluded. And we can think, I'm going to do this and this and this and this and this and this, and then this is going to go this way and this is going to go this way, and these are the kind of rules of engagement for the game, and that's how it is. But that whole thing, we have to plan to a certain extent, could turn out not that way. And on that basis, if one of the elements or two of the elements of our planning, our perceptions of the future, don't go according to plan, or the whole thing seems like it won't work, then our perceptions of the future may be skewed. They may not be accurate. So what the Kruba Ajahns recommend a lot of the time is to stay in the present moment and to try to plan as little as possible. Of course, we need to do some planning. The other tricky way that delusion can come in is that there's also some people who don't like to think. And they don't like to think about the future. They don't like to plan for the future. And more or less they tend to follow their emotions, which is not always a bad thing. Actually, having this kind of intuitive sense of the next step one should take or what feels right, this can actually give accurate and important information in certain cases. When we can't see the future, what's the next step forward? I was listening to a Dhamma talk the other day in which the Venerable who's giving the talk said, feel your way forward. So this kind of capacity, these feelings, these are something that one can use to determine one's next step sometimes when everything else seems like it's fallen away. The difficulty between these things is that people incline towards one of these or the other. They tend to anyways. They tend to incline to planning, and they're very good at setting out goals and achieving discrete goals. Or they tend to incline to not planning, not thinking at all, and they're very good at kind of going with the flow, managing the flow. So when we set these very discrete goals, unexpected variables can come in. When we just go with the flow, there may be things down the road that we want, that we need, and that we have to prepare for now. And if we don't prepare for them properly, then we won't be able to achieve what we want. So this is where delusion can creep into emotions. This is one of the ways. The other way is that delusion can creep into this kind of going with the flow, this going with emotions, these feelings, and that it sometimes gives us feelings that are false, based on defilements, based on greed, based on aversion, based on delusion, not based on a genuine feeling of the right step forward in terms of the Dhamma. And if one doesn't examine these things carefully, then one gets led astray. The spy gets behind our lines of safety and transmits false information so that the enemy, these kilesas, can take over more territory of our mind. So what all of this requires, and we're talking about a knowledge of the Buddha's teachings, what the kilesas are, what good actions are, what bad actions are. But having known this, then there's situations in which there's no clear definition for them. Many situations like that, actually. So this is where one essentially has to rely on one's powers of observation, what one knows from the past, and trial and error. And it's not always something that will be pleasant. It's not always something that will be easy, but it is something that will be necessary. For the people who like to plan, for the people for whom delusion comes in the form of intellectual thoughts about what the future will be, what the past will be, what the principles behind this will be, their solution that they have to develop is this ability to think and this ability to intuit. And this not necessarily always going to be comfortable. For people who like to think, they're counter to the delusion that comes through wayward emotions, through information coming through their feelings that they haven't properly examined, that isn't based on the Dhamma, but it's just based on desire, based on greed. Their solution is to learn to think more. So the Buddha described his path as a middle path, and the Venerable Ajahn Chah gives a simile of a road with ditches at both ends. And if you start to fall to the ditch to the right, you have to go left. If you start to fall to the ditch to the left, you have to go right. But because these things, because these tendencies are so built into a person's character, if delusion arises through thinking, through a thinking type of person, it stays for a while. It's very hard to get rid of. And trying to throw it out by recognizing the patterns behind it, by using emotions, is something very tricky to do. I mean, it's got in there using our strengths. It's like a spy that's come into the territory of our mind and is giving wrong information. And for people who like to feel, like to think their way out, then delusion can last a long time. They're used to relying on their feelings. They're used to being in the moment. And delusion has crept in. Wrong information has crept in about what it is that their emotions are telling them and has blinded them to what they need to do in the future. So this delusion is very difficult to overcome because it's something that uses our strengths. It's something that uses the faculties that we're used to using. It uses the elements of samsara that we've come to rely on and turns them around to try to give us wrong information, to try to give us wrong ideas about the way forward. So the Buddha teaches many different qualities, and one of them that's important in this case is the quality of perseverance, this quality of tolerance. Because whatever our character is, learning to overcome our delusions will require us to develop skills that we don't necessarily have, and we don't necessarily even like. It's sometimes the only way to throw it out. And it creeps in there in an area where a person is weak and gives false information, and a person doesn't like to tread in that area. And a person maybe doesn't like to tread into politics, but we're getting wrong information or wrong perceptions about what people think. Yeah. A person may not like to tread into studying and learning what's in the texts. But here we are, we're getting wrong information. We have wrong perceptions about what the Buddha taught to do in particular situations. We're just used to following maybe what a charismatic person or teacher says. So we have to view our mind in this way, like it's a kind of battlefield. And the territory is something that can be hijacked. We're looking to gain victory over this battlefield completely. And when we gain complete victory, then it's a safe place. The soldiers can move out, can set up towns, can sleep without worry. But so long as these enemies are there, so long as the spies can infiltrate, so long as territory is still held, then we can't use the landscape of the mind in the right way. The landscape of the mind is never something safe. It's not something that will give us lasting happiness. But the more that we conquer of it, the more safe it becomes. So this aspect of tolerance, this aspect of patience, is very important for the elimination of delusion. And because delusion creeps into our strengths, it creeps into the areas that we're used to using to fight the enemy and turns them against us. But there's always a solution to this. The solution sometimes lies in these areas that aren't comfortable. We have to cultivate the skills that are to the opposite. But if we do, we can unearth these spies. And when we unearth them, we learn to rest at ease. We have true friends around us, people who we can trust, people we can rely on, who give us accurate information about the way forward. So in Buddhism, there's always a solution. There's always a solution to any mental problem that arises. There's a solution to greed. There's a solution to hatred. There's a solution to delusion. Although it's slow to go away, although it's very damaging, it's something that can be overcome. if one looks in the right places and uses the right tools to gain back control of one's mind. Okay, so leave that for reflection, and wishing everybody all the blessings of Dhamma practice.